Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast Hockey. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into everything to do with the Ottawa Senators. I'm Cameron.
I'm Noel.
And I'm Nick.
Let's get started.
Looking into the offseason moves made by the Ottawa Senators, they brought in Joonas Korpisalo, Vlad Tarasenko, and Dominik Kubalik as the headliners. They also have Zach McEwen, NHL name legend Bunkdaj Imama, as well as Josh Bailey on a PTO.
Now, with those additions comes some subtractions as well. You've got goaltender Cam Talbot, defenseman Nick Holden, and some other forwards such as Austin Watson and Derek Brassard leaving the team this offseason.
Korpisalo was mentioned earlier. He was signed to a 5-year, $20 million contract, paying him $4 million a year. He posted some solid numbers, split time between Columbus and LA last year. He was traded at last year's deadline, 914 save percentage, and a 287 goals against average. And he was LA's starting goaltender in the playoffs, where they ultimately fell short to Edmonton. He looked solid in the playoffs, let in definitely some shaky goals. He's coming off hip surgery, I think it was 2 years ago. So that's something to keep in mind, whether health will be a concern down the line with this guy.
Another player who got moved at last year's deadline is Vladimir Tarasenko, and he's the second player in our biggest arrivals. This is a player who a lot of people didn't think was going to end up in Ottawa because he was supposed to be on his way to Carolina, but that contract fell through. Vladimir Tarasenko fired his agent, and now he finds himself on this young Ottawa Senators team. So this is a player who's hit 40 goals once, 30 goals six times in his career. So he's a bona fide goal scorer, but he has had trouble staying healthy in recent years. But the experience he brings as a Stanley Cup champion with the St. Louis Blues in 2019 is great for this young team, and he's really looking to redeem himself as one of the league's premier snipers here in Ottawa.
The third biggest arrival for the team is Dominik Kubalik, and this is a player who took a long time to get to the NHL. He started at age 24 in 2019 with Chicago, where he burst onto the scene with 30 goals in that year. Since then, he's shot at a lower rate than 20%. He's shot at pretty much league average, around 10%, 11% the past couple of years, and has put up between 15 to 20 goals each of the past 3 seasons. So I can see him being a decent piece in Ottawa's middle six, but nothing too crazy.
Moving on from our biggest arrivals to the future outlook for the Ottawa Senators. Not the deepest prospect pool in the NHL here, with some headliners like Ridley Gregg and Zach Ospachuk, as well as Igor Sokolov, who just signed a contract extension, and some other less notable names there. Nick's going to get into some more of those guys in a second for you.
And as a team looking to move out of a pretty long rebuild, they've started to move some of their picks. You can see from the draft capital there. But notably, they have 4 first-round picks for the next 3 drafts. And that Detroit first-rounder came from the Alex DeBrincat trade.
Now on to the prospect spotlight for the Ottawa Senators. The 3 prospects we're going to highlight today are Ridley Gregg, Zach Ostapchuk, and Roby Järventie. The first prospect of note is Ridley Gregg, and this is a guy who some people were curious about being drafted 28th overall in the first round in 2020. This is a forward who was a bit unproven at that point and was seen more as a gritty bruiser in the lineup with a bit of offense, but since then he has definitely poured it on, with his last junior year putting up 63 points in 39 games, and then this past year split between the NHL club right away and the AHL Belleville Senators, where, as you can see there, put up a great AHL numbers and limited NHL numbers. So I could see him being a big piece to Ottawa's future now because of his growing offensive potential. The second prospect of note is Zach Ostapchuk, and this is a huge winger out of the WHL. As you can see with the point totals there, he's way over a point per game. That was split between the Vancouver Giants, where he was the captain before he was traded to the Winnipeg Ice at the trade deadline. And this is a guy who I can see being a huge part to Ottawa's future just because of the way that he plays. He's very crafty despite the 6'3" height. He's a Team Canada World Juniors veteran as well, playing on the team twice. And he's a bit of a bruiser as well, but I definitely think the physicality combined with the high skill is a great piece to Ottawa's future. The third prospect of note is Roby Järventie, and this is a guy who I was very high on in the 2020 draft. He fell to 33rd overall, which some people thought was the right spot for him, some people thought it was a little late. The reason that I thought it was a little late is because he put up 25 points in the men's league in Liga, And he also, the previous year, put up 38 points in 36 games in Mestis on loan, which is in Finland as well, and as the junior league. So it's really curious to see that he didn't get picked earlier, but now that he's chosen and part of Ottawa's draft system, he put up a really great rookie numbers with 33 points in 70 games, and then this past season he improved, putting up 30 points in 40 games. This is a guy who I see as a clear trajectory to the NHL, and I really hope to see him get some really good runs with the training camp roster and see if he makes the team. If not, he'll be a big piece to the AHL team this year.
Moving on from our prospect spotlight to the projected lineup for the Ottawa Senators. We're going to start with the forwards here, and that first line there with Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stutzle, and Vladimir Tarasenko is really a first line that can compete with anybody in the NHL. It's an unbelievable first line. Stutzle had a unbelievable breakout season last year, almost hitting 100 points. Brady Tkachuk is probably the best power forward in the NHL. And as you mentioned earlier, Tarasenko is looking to bounce back as the sniper he's known for. And then a very solid second line as well. A really good second line, actually, with Claude Giroux, Josh Norris, and Drake Batherson. Great to have a veteran presence on that line with Claude Giroux. Josh Norris and Drake Batherson are two incredible players who could hover around point per game in any given season. That third line there has quite a bit of youth on it with Ridley Gregg and Shane Pinto. I think Shane Pinto as a third line center is really shows the depth this team has down the center on those in that top nine. And then Dominic Kubalik too, who's always a threat to score 20 goals. So another great player there to have in your top nine. And then the fourth line there with Matthew Joseph, Mark Kostelik, and Zach McEwen. Matthew Joseph is a guy who, as we're going to get into later, probably won't be on the team come opening night. But I like the pickup of Zach McEwen. I think you need some guys to come in and kind of protect the younger players that you have on this team, and I think he's a great player to do that. And then the extras there are Kelly Parker and Igor Sokolov.
Now on to the defense for the Ottawa Senators. These projected pairs show Thomas Chabot alongside Jacob Chychrun on his offside. As we've seen before, Jacob Chychrun can play both sides. He played both sides frequently in Arizona, and it was probably questioned whether he would play the left or right side coming to Ottawa because of the amount of people on the left side here, as you see with Jake Sanderson and Eric Brandstrom needing to play the left side. So the versatility of Jacob Chychrun is going to help this team out in the future, where he can play the right side despite being a left shot. So the second pair here, we've got Jake Sanderson alongside Artem Zub, and I think this is a great combination of defense and offense. Jake Sanderson has yet to break out offensively as much as people would hope for, but I do believe this season is a huge season for Sanderson. He just signed his 8-year contract for $8.05 million a year, and I believe this guy has a very high offensive ceiling despite being such a great defender already. So alongside defender Artem Zub, this is going to be another good pair to have in your top four. And then you've got Eric Brandstrom, who seems to kind of fallen out of favor with most teams around the league since he got drafted by Vegas in the draft after the expansion draft, and then traded in by the Mark Stone trade, and now he's in Ottawa. He still hasn't cracked a top four yet, really. He's been the third pair, but he's comfortable in that sheltered minutes. So I do see him being a good part to this future, but maybe not as huge as the Sandersons or the Chabots. He's alongside Travis Hamonic, and then you've got JBD as the extra there, who has also sort of, lost his potential over the course of the years. He's getting older. These guys are all getting up in age in the mid-20s now, so you understand that this is no longer a prospect. This is more of a project at this point.
And finally, looking at the goalies here, we have a pretty solid tandem in Joonas Korpisalo and Anton Forsberg. Korpisalo was just signed to that pretty big deal, so he's going to be paid starter money. We expect him to get most of the starts, but Anton Forsberg is a good backup as well. He was their starter last year. I think he was a tandem with Cam Talbot until he got a pretty nasty double ACL tear, was it? He got stretchered off the ice, so we're looking for him to have another healthy season here, which would be nice to see. And then Mads Sogard he got some games after Forsberg's injury, but he's just another young depth piece. I don't expect him to play much barring injury.
Moving on from our projected lineups to the storyline surrounding this 2023-2024 Ottawa Senators team. So the first one is the really big one right now in Ottawa, and it's just the fact that Shane Pinto remains unsigned, and it's not nobody expects that he's not going to end up back in Ottawa. It's more or less a done deal that he's going to get re-signed. The team really wants him back, but as of right now, they currently just don't have the cap space to re-sign him. They only have $120,000 in cap space, but Shane Pinto is a player who played all 82 games last season, had 20 goals and 15 assists in what was his rookie year. So that's just incredible totals for young forward in his rookie year. If I had to guess what he's going to be looking for, I think it's pretty much widely regarded he'll be looking around the $2.5 million range. So obviously they don't have the money to offer him that right now. Um, I know that a bunch of teams like the Boston Bruins have called asking and seeing if they could trade for him because he'd address their need down the middle. But from everything I've heard, it doesn't sound like Ottawa wants to move him. And how could you blame them?
Yeah, I think it'd be a mistake to move him. He was really impressive last year. He was played the second line center at some points due to
Yeah,
Norris's injury, but is viewed as like a really good third line center in my opinion. And his rookie year, like he obviously has room to grow. So I really hope they can find a way to sign him. I think they're going to bridge him, as you said, 2.5 million. That makes sense. As for term, 2 years, maybe 3 years. We'll see
makes
really
sense. Yeah.
what happens, but they're probably going to have to move out a piece, whether it's because he'd be a really bad it'd be a really bad loss if they lost him.
Yeah, definitely. At this point, because it's getting so close to the start of the season, I'd even argue that a 1 year deal happens at this point. Maybe like a
Mhm.
1 year, $2 million deal happens. But in that case, you still need the cap space for that. So I think of someone like Mathieu Joseph, and he's got the $2.95 million cap hit. We'll talk about him as well in the second storyline there. But he is someone that apparently teams have told they need a first round pick along with him to shed that salary. So that's an interesting piece that they might have to do just to keep Shane Pinto in their roster.
Yeah, I mean that segues us perfectly into the second storyline there. It's completely interrelated. The reason they need a cost-cutting move is because they need to go over the cap to re-sign Shane Pinto. So, like you said, Nick, the main guy being thrown out there is Matthew Joseph at the 2.95 cap hit. The big thing with him is he has 2 years left on his deal. I think that's probably why teams are so reluctant to take that contract back. And honestly, Matthew Joseph is a guy who, when he came over to Ottawa, he was playing in the top six initially. I think he was point per game in that limited stretch after the trade deadline a couple years ago. But ever since then, they've added some really good players to the forward group in Ottawa, and he just hasn't been able to crack the top six. And it's led him to playing lower down in the lineup. As you saw on the projected lineup, we have him on the fourth line. So the opportunity just hasn't been there. But if that first round pick is too pricey for Ottawa to move out, uh, that cap hit, then another guy whose name's been thrown out there is recent acquisition Dominic Kubalik. I mean, he was a great return as part of the Alex DeBrincat trade, but if it comes down to a first round pick or losing Kubalik, they might opt to move Kubalik out instead.
Yeah, Kubalik does have limited potential. He's around 20 goal scorer. I mean, he put up some really good seasons in Chicago and started off the season last year red hot, but has like fell off near the end of it. So I could definitely see them moving out either one of these guys.
Yeah, the funny thing I think of when Kubalik, because you just signed him, it reminds me of the NHL video games where you trade a guy you
Yeah.
just signed and they get super mad at you for doing that and the morale goes down. So I do wonder if that's a real life thing or just a video game piece. But Mathieu Joseph does seem like the casualty in this scenario, unfortunately, because he does provide a good amount of speed and skill that probably doesn't fit well in the bottom six. That's probably why he has faltered a bit in the past. But I do wish for him to have the best opportunity wherever he goes. So maybe that is outside of Ottawa.
Yeah. I also believe he's a pretty good defensive player as well. So that could be a bit of a loss for Ottawa because I don't think they have a heck of a lot of defensive players there. The other thing too, I forgot to mention during the lineup uh, component was that they also have Josh Bailey in there on a PTO. So this is a guy who could easily fill into that third line, left wing, right wing role if they were to lose Kubalik or Joseph. So that's some good insurance there too. But again, they're going to have to give him money. So that probably means sending a guy like Sokolov or something like that down and just signing Bailey to a minimum contract. But if you're able to get Pinto signed and then sign Bailey to a minimum contract, I think that ends up with a pretty good looking bottom six.
A holdout from Shane Pinto's end of the deal would be pretty devastating to the Ottawa Senators. That's really
Yeah.
looking to be competitive this year. And he truly was a big part of their success last year. Although they didn't make the playoffs, they definitely took a step forward. So they really need to find a way to work out this issue.
Yeah, it's something that you kind of wonder if they did this at the beginning of the summer, they would have had more suitors. This is something that they
Mm-hmm.
have definitely found out too late, as all the teams are now constructing their rosters. More than half of the teams in the league are going to be above the cap within a week's time. So you're looking at a player that's making $3 million. No team has $3 million or wants to use $3 million today for this player to be in their middle to bottom six, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one team I saw getting thrown around a lot is the Philadelphia Flyers. They definitely have some cap space and they're not really projected to be competitive. I think we had them third last in our standings. So that seems to be a bit of a fit. It would probably be Danny Briere would probably love to get another first round pick in there. So it makes sense that they're starting the bidding so high. But in terms of a realistic trade, I mean, I'd take a second round pick to take on the cap hit of Mathieu Joseph. Like I think he's a good player, and if you can reclaim some of his value, then you can probably move him out later on. So
He's
wouldn't be
still
a bad
relatively
bet.
young, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. The first seems a bit extreme. I think second,
Yeah, he's still
if they're gonna have
26.
to.
He's
Yeah.
Yeah.
26, and he's got like he's locked in, which is both good and bad. You're looking at a guy who's got not going to be asking for more next season because he's got the fixed value, but at the same time he is making $3 million, which you have to pay him. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see
He's
which teams bite.
he's definitely slightly overpaid, but if I'm a team like Philly, I'm taking a flyer on him, and if worst case scenario you trade him out at the deadline with a little bit of retention, I think that pumps his value up to contending teams because he is a good player at the end of the day. Um,
Yeah, and we're talking about Josh Bailey being on a PTO. Like this
exactly.
is a weird scenario to be in for the National
Hmm.
Hockey League, where guys that have recently, like Josh Bailey, just got off a deal where he was making $5 million a year, and now he can't get a contract. He has to do a professional tryout where he could just get cut and then be a free agent. So this is a really kind of crazy scenario the NHL is
Yeah.
in with having jobs, and so I think Mathieu Joseph is pretty fortunate to have a contract with some job security, but at the same time, there he could get moved.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Josh Bailey is going to be the perfect replacement for Mathieu Joseph because everything that I've heard, he sounds like he's a pretty responsibly defensive player as well. So would make a lot of sense from that perspective too. Moving on to our third and final storyline here. It's the big news that came out a couple days ago that the sale of the Ottawa Senators has finally been confirmed with Michael Andlauer and his group purchasing the team for around $1 billion, which is really crazy to think that the Ottawa Senators, a team that struggled financially in the past, is selling for $1 billion now. It's great for the NHL to see the value of these teams ballooning like this. It's great. It'll help the cap raise and everything like that. Uh, but in terms of the new owner, if you haven't been following along, the previous owner of the Ottawa Senators, Eugene Melnick, passed away unfortunately a year or two ago, which his death was unexpected and untimely, but uh, kind of in a positive light, opened the door for new ownership to come in, which I think a lot of Ottawa Senators fans thought was overdue because this was a team that had an internal cap at certain points in its history and kind of just some antics that people weren't really happy about at various times. But in terms of the new owner, this is a guy who so far said all the right things. He seems to be open to moving the team downtown, which would be huge for this team. And in terms of spending money and being competitive, he seems to be primarily focused with winning a Stanley Cup, which all of these things should just be music to the ears of Ottawa Senators fans.
Yeah, moving the team downtown would be absolutely huge for this franchise. I think it'd really cement them as one of the more legit franchises in the NHL. I mean, their arena right now is definitely questionable. It's what, 40 minutes outside of Ottawa. It's pretty pretty unacceptable to have your fans drive all the way out there just to see a game in a pretty terrible arena too. So moving it right downtown, the LeBreton Flats, would be awesome for this franchise. And I think Sens fans should be really happy with the new ownership.
Yeah, it's definitely, along with saying the right things, he definitely has a lot of personality that we can attach to. I'm reading some of the quotes out of this conference and the celebration of the announcement, and he's saying things like, "Thank you to my kids for letting me spend their inheritance to pursue my passion." And, you know, there were Ryan Reynolds and there were The Weeknd, but I had the best Ottawa celebrity. I had Daniel Alfredson. Like, this is a guy that really, like, it makes it so exciting to be an Ottawa
Yeah.
Senators fan today. Also, the team itself is growing into like a future where there's young guys that are also growing up at this time. So it's a really good move. It bodes well the transition of this franchise as a whole with a new owner and sort of a new identity as a team as well. The hockey team alongside the business operations seem to be going both in the right direction towards a championship and a well-stable organization.
Yeah, I mean, it's super exciting time to be an Ottawa Senators fan. The other thing too is I know there were all these big celebrity names out around the team like Ryan Reynolds, The Weeknd, Snoop Dogg, but at the end of the day, the owner they got is a guy who was a minority owner of the Montreal Canadiens. I believe at one point he owned the Hamilton Bulldogs. So this is a guy who knows the business of running a hockey team, and it's just great. It'll be a seamless transition, and I mean, the one thing to look out for will be to see who he's going to keep on staff and who's going to be leaving in the near future. Some people have wondered whether Pierre Dorian's days are numbered and the coach DJ Smith. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch out for as well. Moving on to our final segment here, we're just going to take a little bit of a broad overview of the offseason and the season coming up for the Ottawa Senators. So, in terms of the offseason, we're going to give them a B rating, and that might seem a little bit low based on some of the moves they made because they did make some good moves. But the reason it's going to be a bit lower here at a B is simply the first reason is that Joonas Korpisalo contract, although I like the addition of Korpisalo, I think giving a guy who's had some pretty checkered injury history a 5-year, $20 million contract is a huge risk. And if it kind of blows up in their face, this is going to be a Jack Campbell type scenario for the Ottawa Senators. So that's worst case scenario. Best case scenario, they're going to get a starting caliber goalie at $4 million for 5 years. So it's a huge risk. It could work out wonderfully, or it could backfire in their face. But also, the return on the Alex DeBrincat trade, well, it was kind of making the best of a bad situation, kind of begs the question as to whether they should have ever gone out and acquired him in the first place, because they went out and acquired a guy who had 1 year remaining on his term, took that risk, and that kind of blew up in their face because they weren't able to recoup all of the assets that they gave up to get him. So although they made it the best of a bad situation, they were able to plug the hole that he'll leave with Kubalik and Tarasenko, which were both good moves. Still kind of stings to lose such a dynamic player 1 year after you get him. As far as the actual on ice product, we're going to give offensive strength a B plus. This is a pretty young forward group that's still developing. The top nine is really good, but that fourth line kind of falls off quite a bit. So looking to maybe add some more depth if this team is really competing during the season would maybe be something to do. Same thing kind of goes for that decor. A great top four with a bit of a weaker bottom pair. So B plus there as well. And then B and net, they have two solid goalies, which could be a really good tandem. But to be real, these are both guys who've dealt with serious injuries, and that's a massive risk. So we're going to have to see how the health holds up in net for Ottawa. So that's why it's going to be a bit lower at a B right now. But this is a grade that could definitely go up, as could the other ones, because it's such a young, up-and-coming team. So look for these grades to hopefully go up if things go well for Ottawa. And then in terms of the future outlook, it's going to be an A. The future's bright for Ottawa Senators fans, whether it's the new ownership or all the young players that got locked up at great cap hits.
The Eastern Conference is so stacked. It's really hard to place Ottawa in our projected standings. So we have them as an aggregate missing the playoffs, the fourth in the wild card race. So just on the outside looking in, and we really expect them to, or I think most people expect them to take another step from their already competitive season last year. So it's going to be really interesting to see at the end of the year where Ottawa falls.
And on to our final graphic here. It's just looking at the individual rankings. So for Nick, he had them 20th overall, missing the playoffs. Noel had them 15th overall and making the playoffs. I had them 17th overall and missing the playoffs for an aggregate rank of 17th in the NHL and not making the playoffs. So if you want to get into why you think this is a playoff team at all, Noel, just go ahead and take it away.
First of all, I want to preface this that between Ottawa and Buffalo, it's a complete toss-up for me.
Yeah.
These are two both like young up and coming teams that people are projecting to take another step forward. So I do have Ottawa just edging out Buffalo into a playoff spot here. And for me, it just really comes down to I think some people overlook the pieces on Ottawa. I mean, people kind of forget about Jacob Chikrin. I know he's had some injury history. He was just acquired at the deadline and didn't play much for them. They didn't make the playoffs, and he dealt with some injury on the team. But he's a really dynamic defenseman, and he posted some really good numbers in Arizona. So I'm just really counting on a bounce back from him. I'm high on Korpisalo. I think he's going to take this first starting job and run with it. And also just that top six is absolutely lethal. I hope that Josh Norris can stay healthy, and as well Jake Batherson. I hope there's no off ice issues going on there. So I'm high on the top six, top nine even. Their defensive core I think is really underrated as well. Zub's a good piece. Sanderson just signed a big contract. I'm really just listing names here, but I think all their players are pretty underrated, and that's why I have them making the playoffs.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I mean, like you said, I think there's a bunch of teams there. I'll even add the Islanders in there as well, with Ottawa and Buffalo as teams that it's really a toss-up as to whether or not they're going to make the playoffs. It's going to be absolute bloodbath in the middle of the pack there. So going to be really exciting to watch that play out this season.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I just happen to like Buffalo a bit more than them, and it's no disrespect to Ottawa. I think they're going to take a big step this year.
Yep, same on my end with Buffalo being ahead of Ottawa, but it is marginally better than Ottawa. As you can see, 17th in the whole league, yet not making the playoffs in the East, whereas we had Vancouver making the playoffs at 19th in the West just because of the way that conferences are split up.
We even forgot, sorry, Florida's in there too, the Panthers.
Yeah.
So there's just a glut of teams in there. It's ridiculous. It's going to be incredible to watch. The parity in the NHL is amazing right now.
Yeah, that wild card race, similar to if you're a baseball fan going on in the AL East right now, it's going to come right down to the wire.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to watch it. But that's going to do it for this video, guys. So that's going to bring us exactly to the halfway mark of this series. So thank you so much, guys, for joining us along on this journey. We really appreciate all the support and love you guys have been showing. So we'll catch you guys in the next one, and please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.